Hello, everyone. This is Mike the Wandering Took. This is not a normal episode. No, instead, you can consider this the liner notes to the custom Arkham Horror campaign we ran from December 2021 through February 2022. This gives me a chance to show you guys what was going through my head, as well as some of the things that helped guide this campaign, and I am offering it up to the community. This is my gift to you. If you want to read the story in full, check out the link in the show notes. By all means, just have fun with it. Hopefully, it inspires you to do something similar. All right, let's get started. The original concept of this was that we have a lot of friends that play Arkham Horror, and we have limited gaming time, especially in the evenings when everyone is free. And I wanted to play something with as many people as possible. Daniel and I obviously run the channel, and we frequently bring guests on. We want to do something to bring everyone together a little more frequently than we otherwise might. So the idea of mixing together a bunch of scenarios and meeting friends along the way was how this all got started. Now, Daniel and I originally chose two heroes just because I want to try Lily Chen, and Daniel's been itching to play Jenny Barnes again. So we decided to stick with those two characters. And from there, it was, what the heck do you want to play? I got a bunch of people together and asked, what are your favorite scenarios? What do you want to see again? And I got a lot of, well, anything, but I did get some specifics. Carcosa was obviously it's obviously a fan favorite. Catherine said that she never actually finished The Circle Undone. She took the easy way out, unknowingly at the time. She just happened to be inducted into the inner circle of the Silver Twilight Lodge and and ducked out of that scenario because there's a way you can do that in that campaign. So she hadn't seen the end and was very curious what that was like. Uh, I wonder if she thinks that's a good choice. Daniel had expressed interest in the catacombs beneath Paris. One of our fellows, Grant, who goes by Anzu, he's brand new to the Arkham universe. I played through the first campaign with him, that being the first campaign being Night of the Zealot. So I didn't want to throw him into anything too complex. So we decided to start with Dunwich Legacy, and The House Always Wins is a fantastic scenario. I love it. And I know Grant was itching to play that one because we had just started playing the extracurricular activities and he wanted to see something new. And then for the fourth campaign box, I pulled rank and decided to go to the Forgotten Age. I know it gets a bad rap, but that is still one of my favorite campaigns in this game. So, but I did play nice. I did decide to take us to some of the nicer scenarios. Threads of Fate is a fan favorite because it's such an open world scenario. And of course, Depths of Yoth offers a fun challenge suitable towards the end of the game. So at this point, the campaign started coming together. We choose two scenarios from each campaign and bring a different guest on for each one. All right, so we take the four boxes we have, two scenarios per guest, and we have a standard 8 scenario campaign. Great. We can start with the Dunwich Legacy because it tends to be on the easier side, and I specifically chose scenarios that started towards the beginning of that campaign, and then gradually moved to the rough stuff. The challenge at this point was in trying to figure out how to tie this whole dang story together. How on earth do you tie the blobs in Dunwich to the witches in Circle Undone to somehow getting everyone to the depths of Mexico and then to Paris, I guess? And that took a lot of thought. And what eventually happened is, in reading the scenario resolutions for the scenarios that I'd chosen, I started to see some common threads in that half of the scenarios we chose had some kind of glimpse of beyond a tear in reality. The obvious one being the Essex County Express, where you're literally pulled into the maw. In the Circle Undone, you're pulled into the edges of time and space to confront Azathoth. Even in Carcosa, in the catacombs itself, you probably don't even remember this because it's a footnote to this whole campaign. But in one of the scenario resolutions, you actually fall through a portal and view Dim Carcosa. And then, of course, the Forgotten Age, there's the concept of this Nexus of Nikai. So that became the idea that I wrote this loose story around. Now, originally, this was just going to be a couple lines here and there just to tie this loose story together. And of course, as many of my projects do, this ballooned into something much bigger and better in the end. It took a lot of time, but I'm pretty happy with the result. And I started writing this initially to be a campaign that anyone could play, but that actually went out the window as I began writing it because I started writing in the characters that we were playing. And as people were playing the game and certain traits emerged, I started writing those into the story. So, okay, maybe it's not something that anyone can pick up and play, but it can act as a guide. It can act as a guide. And perhaps this encourages some of you to try something similar. This campaign was written in two parts. Originally, I wrote just the first two sections. I knew right from the get-go that this was going to be a campaign with flashbacks. I mean, I could have written a linear campaign and tried to tie in the story, but with only two scenarios per campaign, you have to tie things up really quickly. And because of these scenarios we wanted to play, that was just getting messy. I mean, we had to go directly from Essex County Express into the Forgotten Age, and that's just it would have been too far-fetched. So instead, the idea was you have Lily and Jenny, who have obviously developed a relationship, spent a lot of time together in previous adventures against the unknown and the unknowable, and we're just picking vignettes. We're picking things here and there, particularly the little stories that have something to do with peering into the other side, because that's ultimately what's going to tie the story together at the end. So the first half I wrote in November, December 2021, and I did not know where it was going to end. I knew what I wanted. I knew we had flashbacks, and I knew that where we were going to end up. I already had the scenarios kind of planned out in my head of where we were going first. It was Dunwich, and then the Forgotten Age, and then we were going to mix the Circle Undone with Path to Carcosa. And I decided to mix those two together because I really wanted to revisit the asylum. The whole idea that MJ wrote into the asylum, where you don't know if you've been there before, I really wanted to play that up. I wanted to play that scenario as is, out of order, because normally that is the third scenario of the Carcosa campaign. And at this point, I've actually flipped it. I've effectively hinted that we've, in the past, completed the Carcosa campaign, and then we go back and we revisit the asylum. This gives us a fun adventure at the end, and this little, that little niggling, unreliable narrator thing, right? Have we actually been here before? And I thought that was kind of cool. So let's start with the first four. As I mentioned, we wanted to start with the Dunwich Legacy in order to keep things simple. Strategy I took for the first two boxes was one scenario for setup, second scenario for visiting the rift. So in Dunwich, that would be the house always wins, set the stage, let's introduce the guest, let's have some fun, and then we go to the scenario that introduces the rift, which is the Essex County Express. When I was building my Lily Chen deck, I randomly shuffled together all of the new weaknesses. I have this thing, I don't always draw from the entire basic weakness pool, and that's because I want to explore the new ones. How many times do you draw Psychosis? You're like, ugh, this again? It's old, it's boring. So I specifically wanted to play with one of the newer ones, so I shuffled the newer ones and randomly drew leg injury. So I thought, hey, let's write that in, So how do you set up a series of flashbacks? Well, part one is you have Lily beaten and bruised, maybe her legs causing her problems, and we are going to. I knew this right from the get-go. I knew she was going to wake up in Arkham Asylum. tended to by a nurse. But I specifically did not name the nurse because I didn't know where this was going to go. For all I knew, one of our guests was going to choose Carolyn Fern as their characters, in which case I could have written the nurse in to be Carolyn. Likewise, further down the road, when Jenny meets her interrogator, that could have been, say, Joe Diamond or somebody. I didn't know where this was going to go, and they could either be good, they could be evil, they could be a mix of the two. Maybe one would go one way, one would go the other. At this point, I wasn't sure. It was just, we're setting the stage. Lily's, broken and bruised. She's got this spiritual healing, which is nice because she recovers rather fast. But in order to set up this flashback, the nurse probes, what happened? Why are you here? And in order to guide the story where I wanted to go, I let the woman who's tending her acknowledge that there's some kind of music happening. There's a storm raging outside wherever Lily is. She doesn't know at this point, but there's a storm raging and she can hear this flute on the wind. And that's our key. That's the woman acknowledges the music. And this is something that Lily knows that not everyone can hear. So this is what allows Lily to open up and then allows her to tell the story and allows us to play the scenario. So we play through The House Always Wins. And it's a very simple, way back in the day, we're joined by Grant, who's playing Nathaniel Cho. We're busting up a casino, and that just gets our feet on the ground. Very simple, and the only difference is that in the resolution, I decided to give every investigator 3 bonus experience for being awesome. I did this for 2 reasons. One is that Dunwich is stingy on experience, and 2, I really wanted to explore some of the high experience cards because I find that we just don't get a chance to do that in a lot of campaigns. And I also knew that we were jumping into the deep end rather quickly. Dunwich was one thing, but scenario 4 of this campaign is the depths of Yoth. And I wanted to give us at least a little bit more experience in preparation for that, because I had no idea how that was going to go. Scenario 2, the Essex County Express. This scenario I wrote in full, so I wrote the story in full as well as all the resolutions, because I didn't know how it was going to go. Your investigators can either survive the train, they could all get swallowed up, or one could get swallowed up by the rift. So I wrote every resolution. As it turns out, no one got swallowed by the rift in this scenario. We did rather well. But it's all written, and it's inside my little document that I'll tag down below. I give some exposition just to fast track why we are on our way to Dunwich, but the whole point of this scenario is to bring us to the rift, because that ties up this little arc with Lily and her nurse. In the resolutions, I have a couple extra things added to the campaign log. We can either, the investigators survived the incursion outside of Dunwich, or the investigators were swallowed by the rift out of Dunwich. And again, I wasn't exactly sure where this would go, but I wanted to give the investigators something every time that they were swallowed by a rift, possibly to feed into how many, are they, secrets, tokens we get in the Circle Undone. At the final scenario of the Circle Undone, you have these resource tokens that allow you to do great and wonderful things, but you have to play the campaign to earn them. I needed something else, so I decided to tie those resources to our experiences getting to the other side. So if you, in this case, lost and ended up being swallowed by the rift, then you get a boon later on in the future scenario. All right, at this point, we say goodbye to Nathaniel Cho, and we welcome in Roland Banks, and this was played by Jesse the Black Horror, beginning with Scenario 3, Threads of Fate. Now here the story takes a 180. We set Lily aside for now, her and her kind nurse, and we switch to Jenny, who is in a very different predicament. She is being interrogated by a gruff-looking man, again, unnamed, because I wasn't sure who this was going to be, if anybody. down the road. And this road itself, I am very, very pleased with this introduction. Uh, the whole interaction between Jenny and this man was great. The story in the Threads of Fate really fed into this because you have these two expeditions to Mexico. It's not just one. You have your first one in the deluxe box and your second one throughout the campaign. So that leaves, to an outsider, that leaves two things to follow up on. You know this first investigation took place because it was funded by the Miskatonic University. But then there's this question of the second one. What happened there? Who survived? Who wrote anything down? And in this case, Alejandro did not fund that second expedition. Our investigators went off by themselves. So that opened the door to this interrogation. Why were you there? Why was this debutante running around beneath the jungles of Mexico? And then I, tied in this little war of words, and I really do love that introduction. And the scenario itself, of course, we had to play the Return to version because all three of us were veterans at this game. And this was great because it gives us an opportunity to gather a lot of objective cards that we could use for the rest of the campaign. We have Ichtaka, we have Alejandro, we have the Expedition Journal, we have Vela. Vela is, oh my goodness, she is only in the Return to box. She is amazing. Definitely worth going for that bonus act deck. The only other thing to change was in the resolutions. Normally, in the vanilla version, you get experience based on what acts you completed. In the Return to, you don't. You get some experience. The bulk of your experience can only be used towards supplies. Now, since supplies were going to be almost useless, aside from the next scenario, that obviously wasn't going to work. So instead, I gave us the experience as per vanilla version. But then for every Act 3 that was completed, we got a bonus supply. And I chose, a list of 4 supplies. All 4 of these come up in the Depths of Yoth. So I wanted to give us the opportunity to grab a couple supplies. And, chances of us getting all 4 were almost nil. But even so, I wanted to give that experience. You have some supplies, you don't have other supplies. And then, of course, I added tally marks under Yig's Fury because Depths of Yoth has to start with some Fury so that you know where to start the level. And I didn't want to start from level 0 necessarily. I didn't want us to start, too deep under Yig's Fury. So I wanted to hit, level 1, level 2 of the Fury track. So adding 2 tally marks under Yig's Fury for each act that was completed was a good way to go. The Depths of Yoth then proceeded as normal. Again, I wrote a new introduction. The resolutions, this is where things got a little different because yes, the investigators kind of see the other side, but the way it's written wasn't enough, and I needed to tie in the sound. I also wanted to tie in the idea that the veil to the other side may be different. Each rift might behave differently. In the original one, in Dunwich, it was more grasping. It was trying to pull you in. This one, I wanted to bring in that feeling of, pain and domination. The Forgotten Age is all about trauma, right? That's your thing. That's the thing you remember about this campaign is the trauma, the physical and the mental. So I wanted to embody both of those into this story where the rift is trying to grab hold of you. Now, at this point, the investigators would enter the Nexus of Nakai, and I decided to add that to the campaign log. There is no other opportunity. This just happens in one of the resolutions. This has to happen just based on how the resolutions flow together. The investigators enter the Nexus of Nakai. It has to happen because that's how I wrote the story, which means every run through you're going to add this to your campaign log. Fine. It's another one of those, hey, did you enter the other side of this rift? And sure, whatever. A bit of a miss there, but I also didn't want to write in 5 different resolutions when we're only realistically going to read one. So then we enter the second half, beginning with the Pallid Mask. And for all the Carcosa scenarios, we were joined by Ben McDogg, playing as Bob Jenkins. We once again stay with Jenny's point of view. And I bandied about this back and forth, and I decided I liked the interaction between Jenny and her interrogator more than Lily and her nurse. I thought there was more opportunity to build. Lily would have been, I thought, kind of bland at this point because we're not far enough along in the campaign where she should be able to realize where she is. Instead, I wanted to push Jenny just a little bit. Just a little bit. And at this point, we had played the previous 4 scenarios. So I was writing this with foreknowledge. And a couple things I knew about Jenny is that she was taking no guff, and she refused to kill anybody, because up till now, Daniel had not played out her twin 45s. He just hadn't. So I thought I'd write that in. So this one, he's pushing Jenny. Jenny knows that something's going on outside. There's this big storm going on, and this interrogator keeps probing her for information. And he keeps going. He keeps going. She's already told him about Mexico. Now he wants to know about Paris and the catacombs. She's, what? Okay, fine. So that gives us the last, well, more or less the last of our flashbacks. There's one more, but it's basically what just happened prior to Lily getting hurt and Jenny getting captured. This is the last, deep flashback. And the catacombs are just a fun scenario. They're probably my favorite of that whole campaign box. I know it's Daniel's favorite. And again, crazily, there's this portal in one of the resolutions, but in order to get there, you have to have a very specific act. I believe you have to beat the man in the Pallid Mask as opposed to parley with him during, I believe it's Act 2. Now, I also didn't want to force us into taking one path versus another. I did want to leave the players with some autonomy. So instead, I wrote the one resolution where you fall through the rift. Again, I elaborate. There's music, there's flutes. But I also write in the other resolution so that it ties into the resolution that I wanted the players to go. So there's 2 ways to basically get to the same point, depending on how we decide to run through that scenario. And again, it's all in the campaign notes. In the campaign log, record that you know the site of the gate. Of course you know the site of the gate. That's the whole point of this scenario. Oh yes, in this part. Your experience through the abyss has strained your already fragile state. Each investigator earns 1 random madness weakness. That's another thing I wanted to do in this. Every scenario kind of has its thing that it hurts the players with. In Dunwich, what's the first thing you remember? Oh my gosh, I had to add those tokens to the bag. Remember when you first did that? Like, I earned this? The campaign book says I earned this token. Great, thanks guys. And then in Carcosa, it was all about the madness weaknesses. And in Forgotten Age, it was all about your trauma. I was seriously considering finding ways to just auto-give people trauma in the Forgotten Age. I eventually abandoned that idea because we all got trauma anyways in one or more of those scenarios. I didn't want to pile it on too hard because I knew where we were going, and I still wanted to, have fun. So I thought this was a nice touch, giving us an extra random madness for falling through the gate. And again, it gives the rift a different flavor. This is not the piercing pain. This is not the grasping. This gate is all about warping your mind, right? Because it's Haster. It's going to Dim Carcosa. And then we have my favorite bit, the interlude inevitability. Love it. This is where Jenny realizes what's happening. The interrogator has pushed her too far, and she's realized that she's being played. And I had this lovely bit where there's this little scuffle, and Jenny pulls out her 45s, and she has this one line. I was hoping not to use these, but I suppose it's the first time for everything. And I loved it because Daniel had never played these guns before, except in this scenario just prior to this. He broke the rule right before we read this part. So, yeah, oh well. He ended up killing a library, or is it a library docent in underneath the catacombs. So, well, it was a fun little bit. Thanks for ruining it, Daniel. No, I'm joking. It was still, more or less made for a good story. So now we finished Jenny's little arc. We can now turn back to Lily Chen because we are almost back at the present day. We have 3 scenarios left. First thing we have to do is set the stage for why the characters are where they are, and then they can get on with the current problem being this storm that's happening right now outside Arkham. So for this, Lily wakes up, and at this point, I figured that no, the interrogator and the nurse, they're bad people at this point. I know this for sure. Rather than write in, a scuffle or something, we're just going to say that the storm has reached its peak. The bad guys in this scenario have fled to find the rift that, as we'll see in this very scenario, another rift opens up above the unvisited isle. And in my head, that's where all of the, let's call them cultists now, because they're basically cultists. That's where all the cultists are running, which means Lily is, still in her bed, asleep, and she has woken up. There's nobody around her. She hears the music, this flute that's been calling to her the whole time. She opens the window. The wind is howling from the storm, and lightning lights up the sky, and she realizes where she is because she can see in the distance St. Mary's Hospital, where she thought she was, and it turns out she's in the asylum. Oh my goodness! Now she's rushing to get dressed and grab her weapons and make her escape. But before we do that, again, right? We've got to set the stage. So she's running through the events in her head. She's waking up. What brought her here? Our final flashback is to the fight against the Silver Twilight Lodge and the witches in the Unvisited Isle. Once again, in the interest of player autonomy, I did not shoehorn in what alliances to make during this scenario. You can choose whether to side with the witches or side with the lodge, and I thought, what the heck? It doesn't really matter who they side with because eventually the group that they're going to be up against is this third faction of which Lily's nurse and the interrogator are a part. So let the investigators choose who they will. And if I'm remembering correctly, we went up against the Silver Twilight Lodge in this one. Oh yes, in this one we were joined by Catherine, aka Atrick, who was playing Ursula Downs. That was a fun one. Especially for these circle tests. Yeah, she had that, oh, what is that skill where you get to add your fleetness to your book and your book to your fleetness? That was utterly insane. So we got through this scenario, and the resolutions here are a little bit messy, and I did want to tie this into the greater story, so the way I wrote it is you read the resolutions as normal, but the last paragraph of all those resolutions have something to do with you being chased by the witches or chased by the lodge. So I said, scrap that. Instead of that, read this new section that ties in this third faction. Lily gets incapacitated. Jenny gets surrounded and captured for interrogation. All right, so now we are back to the present day. No more flashbacks. The Unspeakable Oath, the scenario that scares the bejesus out of everybody. Not so much us because we're going in here with a fair bit of experience. This was all about the fun. I just wanted to have a fun time. We knew this one was going to be the easiest of the batch, but we also knew what was coming up in our last scenario, so we just went for broke. I decided to play with Daniel a little bit here, and in this story, Jenny goes into the asylum. The text in the scenario intro is very similar to the text in the book in that you're ranting and raving to this receptionist at the desk, demanding to be led into the asylum. They finally relent. Okay, all right, we'll nods to the guards. Let's bring you back into the asylum here. And I thought this was great because Jenny has just escaped. She knows there's cultists on the loose. She's ranting and raving about this. Lily's been captured. Oh my gosh. Yeah, I'm sure she's a mad woman at this point. She's ran across half of Arkham, disheveled and half drowned. So it gives the same the same feeling, the same reason for this guy to shove you into the asylum. And then this scenario starts, and it's just Jenny. And I made Daniel play the first turn all by himself because that's what Jenny's doing. She's just wandering around the asylum. And then after he finishes his first turn, I bring out the act deck and the agenda and the encounter deck. I throw a mad patient engage with him because it's a fun way to start the scenario. He gets engaged with a mad patient. Lily bursts out of a room, joined by Bob, who, lo and behold, Bob is here too. Remember Bob? He helped us through Carcosa, and he's back in the asylum again, playing with this whole: did we ever leave? What's going on? Why is he here? Did he come back? Daniel loved it. The issue with this scenario is that there is some tie-ins to the Path to Carcosa campaign, and we have technically already done that campaign. Like, why are we here? We're here to rescue Lily Chen, and Lily Chen is trying to break out. However, the acts instruct you to go find Daniel Chesterfield. So this is the only scenario in the campaign where I rewrote the text on all of the act cards. So the plan is to cause a ruckus, maybe let loose one of the really bad ones that's sitting in the basement, so they can cause enough of a stir that they can rescue Lily and get the heck out. This then ties into the return to box, where instead of rescuing Daniel Chesterfield, you get this abomination that devours Daniel and you have to fight it. Thought that was a great little include. Gives Bob a little bit of character because it was his idea to go down there and let this thing out of the cell to begin with. At that point, they can then escape and move on to the final scenario of the campaign. This brings us to the final scenario. And despite the fact that we were over-leveled, this scenario is brutally hard. And the theme of The Circle Undone is one about inevitability and hopelessness and fate. So in writing this introduction, I tied in Lily's backstory from the official investigators of Arkham Horror, that she's got this destiny that she's been preparing for. It's never mentioned what it is. We know that these gates have opened 3 times for Lily and Jenny. We know that they're being enticed to step through the gates. We know that this is part of their destiny. So I ended this scenario the way that the story really ought to have ended, and that is without a scenario. They go to the unvisited isle. They are so beaten up at this point, and the rift above them is so large that as they're traveling to the site, the center of the Nexus, they're losing hope. They're losing hope. They're overcome with dread because that's what's emanating from this rift. They reflect back on their past adventures, their past friends, and they're standing there, and they do what we always do in our games and our campaigns on this channel. They decide to go out like heroes. And with that, one last hurrah, and they step through the gate, never to be seen again. Now, of course, we came here to play a scenario, so I ended the story there, and then decided that it was up to the rest of us to write the epilogue, which they're never coming back, one way or another, so let's just see what happened to them while they were in there. So before the Black Throne, set up. In the campaign log, record the path winds before you. Next, record tally marks for each of the following conditions. And this is where, had we gone through all these gates, we'd record tally marks. And when I originally conceived this idea way back when, I decided that in some cases it would be a win condition, in some cases it would be a loss condition, whether or not you went through a gate. And going through those gates would give you tally marks. At this point, the only real difference between winning and losing would have been in Dunwich, whereas the resolutions in Forgotten Age would have you entering the Nexus of Nakai, and we would always know the side of the gate from Carcosa. So at this point, the tally marks were more for show than anything else. But I looked at it, and if you get 2 tally marks every time we went through a gate, that's 4 tally marks. And I gave an additional one because we're being true heroes. Why not? 5 tally marks is fantastic in this scenario. I mean, it's not the most you can get. I thought it was a happy medium. So there we go. And of course, we added -4 token to the chaos bag because it shouldn't matter, right? We're true heroes. And then we played the scenario as normal. And I had a couple little snippets as cultists appeared. You know, one of them could be Lily's nurse, one of them could be Jenny's interrogator, basically appearing and giving us the chance to beat them up. And we we know how before the Black Throne ended. It ended the way my runs through this scenario always end, usually getting impaled by a mindless dancer. That's Arkham for you. So I hope you enjoyed that. This was my attempt to pull back the curtain and show you guys what was going through my head as I was writing this. It was a ton of fun. As I mentioned at the top, it was a lot of work, a lot more work than I expected, but it was well worth it at the end. And thank you to everyone who joined me. Grant, Jesse, Catherine, Ben. It was a ton of fun playing with you guys. I really enjoyed it. And of course, Daniel, pleasure as always. Maybe we'll do this again sometime. And heck, if you guys have any of your own custom stuff, please just leave a note. I'd like to see what other people have done. This is my gift to the community. Take it and rework it. See if you can come up with another story of your own. I'd love to see what you come up with. And with that, I will sign off. Thank you, everyone. We will see you next time.